Hello. My name is Erol Amon. I was born in Istanbul, Turkey, 1953. And my family is, my mother was Denise Nahmad Amon, and my father was Rene Amon. And they were married in Istanbul, 1952. 1957, the three of us were a small family, my mother, my father, myself. We moved to Chicago, Illinois, 1957. My father was engineer in Turkey, and he had a job in Chicago for 6 months. I think he set it up by a letter to the engineer in Chicago. And then they just decided to stay in Chicago after that. So I grew up in Chicago. I went to public school, and I went to high school and university in Chicago and medical school in Chicago. And I became a doctor, and I went to Northwestern University Medical School. And then I retired about 2020. And I could tell you a little bit more about my parents. So my mother, she was born in Syria, Aleppo, Syria. And she spoke Arabic and French and English. And she learned how to speak Turkish after she got married. She did not speak Turkish initially, and my father did not speak Arabic initially. So they spoke to each other in French. So I learned French at home. And then I grew up and I became American. Everything was English and American for me. My parents still spoke French to each other. And my mother would read French magazine and newspaper. And so French was their maiden tongue. Now, if they did not want me to understand something, they would speak in Turkish, because I forgot Turkish. So as I grew up, they would speak in French, and then also I would answer in English. And so, but if they didn't want me to understand, then they would speak in Turkish. So basically, I grew up in Chicago and eventually became naturalized American citizen later. I think when I was 21, I applied for naturalization. And my parents, I believe, became American citizens also. My mother was born in 1926. My father born in 1923. So when he was a young man, I think he went to some kind of camp, summer camp, and he met Ataturk when he was about 10, 12 years old. And he spoke very well of Ataturk. And my mother, I said, she, so I will tell you, so when they came to the United States, my mother, she studied as a nurse actually she moved, first let me back up. She moved from Aleppo, Syria to Beirut, Lebanon when she was 13 years old. So she grew up in Beirut. And she said Beirut was very beautiful. It was called the Paris of the Mideast. So she loved Beirut. And they spoke French there and French in Syria. And then, so her whole family spoke French, and our whole family, my father's side, spoke French also. So they could communicate in French. Anyway, she went to a convent were Jewish, but she went to a convent to grow up, went to school in a convent I believe, in Lebanon, and she studied to become a nurse. She had a white nurse's hat, very nice nurse's hat. I saw a photo of her. And then they had I also saw another photo of her when she was a young woman. There was a United States aircraft carrier named the USS Randolph, and it had docked in the harbor of Beirut. So she and about 4 or 5 of her girlfriends, they did not go to school that day. They went to see the aircraft carrier. So they were walking on the deck of the aircraft carrier, and their photo was taken, and their photo went on the front page of the newspaper. And so everybody saw them, even though she wasn't in school. So she was playing hooky from school, and they saw her. But she was very well dressed. She liked to dress very well. She told me, Erol, you have to be chic at all times. You always have to be chic at all times. Anyway, so then she moved to Istanbul, and she went there for a wedding, and that's how she met my father, during the wedding. And then they got married 6 months later. And then I was born a year after they got married. She worked as a saleswoman, and she sold very important women's clothes, designer women clothes, very expensive clothes, very expensive. So she met a lot of people who were wealthy in Chicago, and she became a doyenne of fashion. She became a woman that loved fashion, and she learned all about fashion. And so many of the wealthy people in Chicago who would go there to buy women's clothes, they would go there also for a charity, for hospital events, something. They would always have to have a nice dress for the Friday night, Saturday night, for the evening. And then Monday morning, they returned the dress. And Marshall Field had a policy. The policy said, the customer is always right. So they had to return it. They had to take the dress, even though it was worn, they had to take it back and give her back the money. So that's a story she told me. And she met Elizabeth Taylor. She met Princess Diana. She worked there for 40 years, and we had other friends, some friends that had come from Turkey, some friends that had come, she met people there. They had a group. They would play cards, they would talk French, Arabic, different English, and they made a life there. It was Jewish, but also some of these Jews had come from Greece, Egypt, that area, Turkey. And they all spoke different languages, and they spoke to each other. And she had Muslim friends. She had friends from Iran, friends from, Muslim friends. They became very friendly. And American friends she was very good with people. She enjoyed people. They loved her. She loved them. And she was happy. And they got along very, very well. And same thing with my father. My father was an engineer, and he was more of a, he liked to read. He liked stamps. He liked to read. He liked to listen to music with the record player. And he was not the most social. Like my mother was very social. She liked to go out. She liked to go to different events. She liked to meet people. My father, he could talk to people. He talked very nicely to people. They liked him, but he would not go out of his way. If he had a choice, he would stay home. My father spoke 7 languages. So first of all, he spoke Turkish. He grew up in Turkey. He did military service in Turkey. So he was born there. And, Now, he lived in Shishli. They lived in Shishli, and he said that was a Greek neighborhood when he was growing up. So he learned how to speak Greek. And then his parents and the Jews that had come to the Ottoman Empire from, from Spain, they spoke an old Spanish called Ladino, a medieval Spanish called Ladino. And I think it's a mixture of Turkish, Spanish, Greek. So my father learned how to speak Spanish. So now he knows Turkish, Greek, Spanish, and then he became English translator in the army. So he learned how to speak English. And then because engineering, there was more the scientific languages he had to learn. So he learned some German. At that time, German was scientific language, and also some Russian, although I never heard him speak Russian. So, but he also knew Italian. So he spoke 7 languages. My mother spoke 5 languages. And this was normal. And they could talk to anybody, any religion, any people, it doesn't matter. Everybody, is who they are. And there is no feeling that you can't talk to this person, you cannot talk to that person. That did not exist. My dad had when he was an engineer in Chicago, and then one day they had an opening for an engineer in the Chicago Department of Transit. And so he applied for that, and he did not get the job. And so the job was for engineer, and they gave the job to a young person who had just finished a PhD in at the university in Chicago in engineering. They gave him the job. So my father had a master's degree from Istanbul Technical University, engineering. So he said, I have to go back to school and get a PhD, because the PhD is like my card to work. So it's my work permit to work. So I need a PhD. So he went to Northwestern University. We lived about 20 minutes from there in one direction. And then that's where he would go to learn about, or to get his PhD, to do his thesis. And then he taught as a young assistant lecturer, lecturer, while he was doing his thesis. And he had to go to University of Illinois to teach the students, and that was the other way. So he had to travel every time, about, I don't know, maybe an hour back and forth. And we had to buy a car. We did not have a car. You had to buy a car and then travel back and forth. Went back to Turkey. He lectured there. And in fact, sometimes they could not understand him, even though he's speaking Turkish. He said the Turkish language changed over the years. So he's speaking the old Turkish, and now the new Turkish people, they don't understand him so well. That's what he told me. But he did teach there. And I think he taught at Roberts College. There's a place called Roberts College, maybe. Yeah. And yeah. And then my grandparents, they died in Turkey. They buried in Turkey. Isaac Amon Effendi, he's buried in Turkey. And Isaac found the graves. He found their graves. He went there 2019. He went to the cemeteries. He found their graves. My mother, she would go to work downtown Chicago, where Marshall Field and Company was, and I would go to school. And then I learned everything in English, right? So I played Little League baseball. I enjoyed baseball very much. I enjoyed the Chicago Cubs, which was a baseball team. I watched TV. They had a movie, westerns called Bonanza, and they had advertisement on TV from Chevrolet for the car. See the USA in your Chevrolet was the thing. And so we grew up, I was American, everything American. And then when I turned 21 years old, well, let me back up. So I studied in university in Chicago, at the University of Illinois, and I studied pre-medical and also chemistry. And my dad was very good in mathematics, so he helped me with mathematics because of he knew mathematics very well because of his job and his profession. So he helped me. And then I applied for medical school. And anyway, so 1974, I'm 21 years old. So I applied for citizenship to become American. In fact, I will tell you a story about that. We used to visit, we had no family in the United States. So my mother's family they went from Beirut to Milan, Italy, 1960. And so every summer, they would alternate summers. One summer we would go to Milan to see my mother's family. And the next summer we would go to Istanbul to see my father's family. We had no family in the United States. So, well, the last time I was in Turkey, I was 16 years old, 16. And then when I was 18, the government came to my grandparents' home and they said, "Where's Erol? He has to go to the military." So, well, he's not here, he's in the United States. So I didn't go to military. I didn't live there anymore. But we always had my father said, you cannot get rid of the Turkish citizenship. Once you're Turkish, you're always Turkish. Doesn't matter, you become American, doesn't matter, you're still Turkish. So Isaac Amon, he was an important person. He was Isaac Amon Effendi. He became, on his gravestone, they put Effendi because he did something. He was an important person. He helped the government somehow. So he became an important name. And he was also a member of the Istanbul Community Council. And he was a statistician, a mathematician. He did something like that. Plus he was a rabbi, a Jewish guy. And so every other generation, there's Isaac Amon. He may go back to 1500 or 1400, who knows? And so, So Isaac, the one you met, he could be the 12th or 15th, the number 15 or the 12th Isaac, I don't know. And I'm David, but my Hebrew name, my given name was Erol. The Turkish army is very strong. The military very strong. I think he was proud, I think he was proud. And he said, I think he liked Ataturk very much. I think he liked Ataturk. He said that Ataturk, he liked the way the country separate the mosque and the state, through separation. Like in the United States, there's no church and state. In Turkey, same idea, no mosque and state with Ataturk. I would love to visit Turkey again. It was my home.